ideas, as well as just cover some just very important challenge areas, hurdles, and various ways to overcome them as seen by through the eyes of these experts that are joining us. So we'll take a moment to do very quick introductions from everyone. So joining us today, myself, I'm Chris Crone. I'm the Challenge Manager for the Circular Design Challenge. Been working very closely with Ellen MacArthur Foundation and our various other sponsors and stakeholders to sort of frame and shape and guide the language. Let's see, let's make sure we have our presenter deck given. Okay, so for those, anyways, and so we've been working very closely to shape and frame the language and create the challenge. Also, for those that are joining us, a quick tech note. Please, we all have sort of a level playing field and access to the same features, but be sure to give the platform to our advisors and to those of us presenting so we can sort of maintain the flow and the pace of the conversation. So you'll see this little green ball. Please do not click on that, as that will allow me to continue on through our presentation deck and keep things running. So as I said, I'm Chris Crone. I'm Challenge Manager for the Circular Design Challenge and here with OpenIDEO. And we'll pass it off to brief intros from the rest of our panelists.
Hi there, I'm Linus. I'm the founder and design director of PackRun, the packaging design agency.
Yeah, hi, I'm Peter Goodwin. I'm representing Closed Loop Recycling.
Hi, I'm Sander. I'm project manager at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in our New Plastics Economy initiative, who is leading this challenge.
Hi, I'm Sandrine van Oudijk. I'm program manager of Plastic Innovation Program at NVU, a venture building studio in Rotterdam.
Hi, I'm Sandra Curtis, and I'm the Director of Innovative Projects at Plastic Pollution Coalition.
Glenn, thank you so much, all. As I said, we're just thrilled to have you here and really excited to get this variety of perspectives in the same room together. So we'll just keep cruising right along. In the interest of time, I wanted to sort of kick us off with this first bigger topic question. Without giving too much of an introduction, we just wanted to dive right into some really good content. So our question to our panelists are, what are the three biggest systemic hurdles one might face when developing a sustainable solution within the packaging or plastic space? And we'll hand this over for our first respondent, Sandrine.
Yes, thank you, Chris. So, first of all, I want to congratulate you on taking the time and energy to work on this very important topic of actually developing circular solutions within the packaging and plastic space. And I think there will definitely be a number of hurdles that you might face or are already facing to get your innovation to the market. So I'll touch upon 3 points which I think you might face, and also ways which I think you can overcome them. Being an environmental scientist by training, I first want to sort of point your attention to a first system issue which I think might arise, which is not necessarily in the interest of your getting your product on the market, but it might ultimately be still very relevant to what you're doing. And that is that what you see very often is that impacts might shift from one area to the other. So if you don't take a systems perspective in designing your solutions, then you might actually offset the issue, for example, to creating more energy impact, creating other types of emissions, introducing certain types of materials which you really don't want to introduce into your design. So, for example, if bottles are designed for recycling and your recycling is cost competitive, how can you then also really avoid and make sure that in that whole chain of recycling, closed or open loop, you don't have any child labor or poor working conditions that are becoming part of your supply chain. So that's the first point. Really focus also on using a holistic impact framework to take into account the bigger impact as well. LCAs could work, but I do think that a more systemic framework would be advised in this matter. The second point I want to raise is regarding the market, and that is that a lot of the solutions that you are working on at the moment might actually really require a user mindset change, behavioral change, and we all know that that can be extremely challenging. So just take like this example of Nobo, which I liked, the shampoo balls that dissolve in your hands to then wash your hair with. How does this ultimately really impact the behavior of people, and what changes do they need to make in their lives to start to use such an innovation? And it's basically in that sense very innovation driven potentially, but how can you really create value for the customer ultimately? And that might be in cost, it might be in a lot of other values that you can bring to a consumer. And I think that putting that very central, human-centric and customer-centric into the core of your USP is going to be very important to make your innovation actually become viable in the market. And then the third hurdle, which I want to briefly point towards, is that in a lot of those solutions, you might actually be facing a very large power dynamic of the existing incumbent FMCG packaging industry that you're dealing with. So, also the example of the Noble or shampoo ball or the Quickster, some of those innovations might be really disruptive and disrupt markets that the big fast-moving consumer goods companies are holding their hands very tight on. And so what can you do to really make users start to adopt this, even though you're fighting against those big powers? And also, do you want to start to collaborate with the bigger players and have them jump on the bandwagon? Or if you don't want to collaborate with them, how can you create the alliances that you need to strengthen your proposition and to survive in this very strongly consolidated market? So all in all, I would say that those are some of the key hurdles that I would see and that I actually see startups around us struggle with. And so my advice would be to think very early about your true customer value and how to get your innovation competitively in those channels, and to find a way to move beyond the niche environmentalist, that might like this because it's cool and it's really going to make an impact. But really, how can you create large-scale adoption? And I think it works very well to build out from a gradually but steady growing user base, and also to find a way to collaborate with the existing consolidated market players to speed up the adoption of your innovation. So that is that's what I would like to say to that. So I'm open. Yeah. Now I give the floor to the next speaker on this.
Yes, this is Sander here. So I want to build on what Sandrine just said, and also from my side, a few points or potential hurdles that you could face while designing your solution. I think the first one here is to think beyond the current situation. So don't hesitate to go beyond just tweaking existing solutions, but really think about completely new solutions and think out of the box. So that's sometimes a hurdle that you're thinking within the same framework or within the same kind of context they know, but try to go beyond that. The second one I wanted to mention is around taking the system perspective. It's a bit similar to what Sandrine said earlier, but try to look at the entire system, and that includes the entire system for the packaging itself, so from its raw materials to production to the use phase and the after use phase, but also the wider system beyond the packaging itself of the user and how he uses it in his daily life, but also kind of the whole system around the product you are packing. So not just the packaging, but also the whole system of the product you're packing. And then a third hurdle, which is very much linked to that, is that obviously if you want to look at this entire system, you also need quite a bit of knowledge and expertise of different elements within that system. So a lack of knowledge on some parts of the system could be a hurdle you face. So don't hesitate to try to reach out to the experts on different parts. For example, if you lack knowledge on the after-use system, like if I throw this packaging in the bin, what will happen with it? Like how does it work? How does the collection, sorting, recycling system, how does it work? What are the criteria that will define if my packaging will actually get recycled or not? I think there are multiple design for recycling guidelines available online, but do not hesitate to reach out to other experts and try, ask for their advice. I think the Open IDEO platform is also a great platform to do that. So those were my three points.
Excellent. Thanks so much to both of you. I think those are really excellent points and cover quite a broad range. And we have just a few minutes if any of our other panelists want to jump in and make a point.
This is Sandra, and I was thinking about, Sandrine, if you might be able to expand a little bit more on the collaborative message that you just gave about working with the big players in the system and how you see that as an advantage or disadvantage. There are, from my perspective, significant challenges with that per se. So maybe you could address that a little bit more.
Yeah, so Sandra, thanks for asking that question. I do indeed think that there are challenges as well as opportunities in doing that, in the sense that if you only think about the market share, for example, that if you think about, take this shampoo ball as an example, if you think about the market share for personal care products of certain bigger fast-moving consumer good companies in those countries like in Southeast Asia, where especially the sachets form such an issue, then automatically I do see a big opportunity that their distribution channels and their existing pathways to reach the consumers could be a very good leverage for those products to ultimately reach the market. Yet also those products don't necessarily offer the value that sachets have, like for example the branding value that those companies are interested in. So in that sense, they could very well also form very large obstacles for you to actually get that innovation to the market. So I think I wouldn't be able to say one conclusive statement that yes or no, you should not or you should work with them. But I do think there are opportunities within the existing distribution channels. And I would also say that where you find too much resistance, or actually you see that potentially this innovation is just completely eliminated or like pushed out of the market, I would find other allied partners to work with, like for example NGOs, WWF, Greenpeace, the Zero Waste Collective networks that might actually be better partners to accelerate the innovation. I'm also curious, Sandra, whether you have anything else to add to that.
Becomes from my perspective, on many levels, a philosophical place. You could work inside the system or outside the system. You use the word disruptive, which I think is a really valid point. That it's sort of the culture of a company when you're doing creative new work and really trying to, on many levels, disrupt the market. You may choose to do it. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think that as you mentioned, being creative about how you choose where the alliances are and where you think you can add to a value chain or take advantage of a distribution network are important. And I wanted to just highlight that point for the people that are on the call, so that they put it in their consciousness and they recognize that there are challenges and opportunities.
Excellent. Thanks so much to everyone who joined. That obviously we're moving quickly, so it's a huge topic to cover in just a few moments. But hopefully we're able to pull out some bits of wisdom, which I think I already have been able to. So we'll move right into our sort of first topic question, and this is directly extracted from some of the themes that we're seeing on the platform. And so what we're seeing a lot of are ideas that are sort of creating some variation of a disappearing packaging solution. So through whatever means, the packaging disappears, whether it's through sort of consumption or biodegradability, maybe as mentioned with some of our ideas, they actually dissolve in water. But there are various forms and iterations of this idea on the platform. And so we find this approach really compelling to OpenIDEO and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, since these concepts aim to sort of eliminate the need for the plastic container entirely. As I mentioned, it could be edible, water soluble, but essentially these containers fulfill their duty as packaging without creating plastic waste into the environment if they're appropriately designed. One of the points that we want to bring up, however, is for those designers to consider if we are introducing new materials into the supply chain, what are the externalities associated with that? And then how to account for that, because on a systems perspective, anytime we're introducing a new material, there are going to be some repercussions. However, we are thrilled to see this sort of theme emerging and hope that our participants continue to iterate along these lines. And so the question is, what are the key material and design considerations to keep in mind when developing a disappearing packaging solution? And we'll hand it over to Linus as our first respondent.
Yeah, well, I would like to primarily address this from a design perspective, being a designer, and how to make the designs obvious for the consumer. Because Sandrine, you also touched in on this on your point too on behavioral change or differentiated user intent. So I would like to ask you to study the science of semiotics and the study of science and meaningful communication, designation, and form and visual appearance of a product. So because deviant packaging design and packaging with unconventional properties and purpose could either excite and engage people, but it could also create a lot of misconceptions. So you need to be very careful. And one way to do this could be to exaggerate the purpose of your design, because regardless if the design you're working on is, as you say, Chris, is soluble, edible, biodegradable, you probably don't want it to end up in the wrong place anyway. So you try to make the most of the design rather than relying on the properties of the material that you're using. That's the primary point I would like to address, and I hope that the next respondent could go more into detail on materials. I'm not a material scientist or plastics expert, so I'd like to leave it at that for now and maybe come back to it in the open discussion, but leaving it to Sandra for now. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. What's really funny is that I'm not an expert in this either. Plastic Pollution Coalition has really been built around driving awareness of the plastic pollution issue, working on legislation and regulation, and also driving a variety of campaigns. The elements that we actually talk about for the products have to do more with the chemicals that are included in the design with the plastics. So we really focus on encouraging green chemistry and really looking at safe chemicals that we know do not have any toxic applications, because the health implications for the leaching that can happen out of plastics has been really detrimental in terms of health consequences. So that's a big area for us. And to learn more about that, the Green Science Policy Institute is focused on 6 classes of chemicals that they would actually like to see banned. So that's a link that I could provide. And then the other issues for us are when you look at this hierarchy of compostable, biodegradable, and recyclable, from our perspective, the highest priority would be compostable, which means that the material of the product goes back immediately, well, within 1 to 3 months, to organic material that can then nurture other growth in the environment. Biodegradable, there's confusion about what's compostable and what's biodegradable, and the difference that we highlight is time frame and also the material that might be left over from biodegradable. So biodegradable things can biodegrade in the environment, but they could be just as it could take 5 years, 100 years, but eventually they will biodegrade. But they also may leave traces of chemicals that are toxic and or metals that have been used in the materials. So if the hierarchy, if we're choosing the hierarchy of how to look at the materials that you're using, compostable would be best, biodegradable next, and then recycling. We actually, while it's important to reuse materials that have been used, so we that kind of collection and reuse is important. Really, recycling we view as downcycling, so it's a reuse, and at some point, those materials are going to be in the environment and probably in the waste stream. So I'll stop there, and we can take questions.
Excellent. Thanks so much to both. I think that's it sounds like some expert insights to me, especially around the 6 classes of chemicals, Saban. I think that'd be a great resource to share. Especially given keeping in mind sort of the range of knowledge that some of our participants and ideators on the platform may have. Some may be very aware of the ins and outs, while others may just be designers who are coming into this plastics or packaging space with fresh eyes. So Linus, I really appreciated also your point of making the most of the design rather than sort of relying on those materials. And so wanted to take the opportunity to open it up to the rest of our panelists, especially those with materials expertise or design considerations, to just jump right in.
Hi, this is Sander again. I just wanted to add, I guess, 2 points here. So the first one is indeed taking this materials angle. Obviously, it's called disappearing packaging here, but obviously from a more scientific or technical angle, those molecules obviously do not disappear, right? Or they are consumed, or they dissolve in liquid or whatever. So you obviously need to think through, like, where do these molecules go, and what's the impact of that, right? A very obvious example is you would not want to have a packaging that dissolves or that is consumed that contains toxic or that dissolves in water and then has impact on, if the water goes through the drain and ends up in waterways or oceans, that it has certain impact there. So again, taking that system perspective, I mean, that packaging does not disappear, so where do these molecules go, and what are the implications? And secondly, you might design this type of packaging for a certain way of using them. So you might design them to be dissolved in water, or to be consumed, or to be used in a certain way. But also try to think through, like, what if somebody uses it in a different way? What if somebody, throws it in a recycling bin? What if somebody, if it dissolves in water to make a detergent? What if it accidentally dissolves in whatever, drinking water? Or, just try to think about what are all the potential risks of, misusing this type of packaging, and try to think through, like, how can I, first of all, reduce the risk of this happening, and secondly, how can I minimize the impact by design if this happens? So these were just 2 points I wanted to add here.
I would just like to say thank you, Sander. I think those are really important points to consider.
Hi, it's Peter here from Closed Loop Recycling. I just wanted to make a few comments. I think I agree hugely that there is a large confusion between the differential on what is biodegradable and compostable. And I think we need to understand, if we're designing product for a system, what is that system of capture? There's also a huge social element on here. Biodegradability obviously means that there is an element of break down within the natural environment. But we've got to be careful here, because obviously what we tend to, or historically have been asking people, is to dispose of waste in a system, as opposed to, dispose of in the natural environment, which effectively, leads to littering, which you could argue is how a lot of material finds its way into oceans in the first place. So I think we've got to be very careful and very clear the terminology that we're using for packaging, and get the users to understand what system it's looking to go through. And I think the big side from my perspective in looking at compostability or recycling, compostability is only valid if it finds its way to the relevant commercial composting facility. A product that is compostable is not necessarily biodegradable, and therefore, compostable plastics that end up in the ocean may perform very similarly to non-compostable packaging. And so therefore, and there's merits for both side of things. It's a case of saying, well, if we're creating these products and we're locking in carbon effectively to make these products, what is the best outcome for this? Is it to recover that with carbon and reuse, albeit that it can go back into the same application or downcycled into another application to keep in the system? Or what benefit is this going to have to the biosphere, in fact, in terms of what, nutrient benefit back to schools, what's the added benefit, and therefore taking the decision on both. I think there's no real evolved solution for either, and I think what we'll find within the developed world, we'll see much more locked into recycling infrastructure, where potentially within the developing world, where infrastructure isn't as widely sort of built yet, there might be more opportunities for compostable as well. So I think also in looking at it from a global perspective, there may be differences in the compostable versus recyclable debate depending on whereabouts you are in the world.
Thank you, Peter. I think those are really, really critically important points. So thanks for raising them.
So we actually had an interesting user question, and Peter, this may be one for you. Miranda asked if compostable plastics are only able to break down with anaerobic digestion, and if so, how is the solution something not every city already has?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of compostability, there are two options for compostable packaging. Potentially, you could look at anaerobic digestion or in-vessel composting. Now, from an anaerobic digestion perspective, what the people who own the infrastructure are looking to do is to generate power. There's very little calorific value in terms of packaging. It therefore then tends to go along with food waste, but in the large number of circumstances gets stripped out before it goes through the process. So ultimately it's kind of passing the problem on to the anaerobic digester, but the anaerobic digester ultimately hasn't got the solution for the packaging. I think from an in-vessel composting perspective, there are opportunities for compostable packaging, although I think to meet certain standards, and standards will differ from country to country, it's the effectiveness in the packaging breaking down in the required timescales to meet the standards, to then be able to have that material and turn it from a waste to a resource legally within each country. And therefore, different materials will perform differently. For example, bagasse may break down within the timescales, but something like PLA may not. And therefore, I think it's key to understand, and go and engage. What I would say is go and engage with the anaerobic digesters, with the in-vessel composters, and design the products that will go through their systems. Because I think the biggest errors I see being made are people who design something that potentially could go through a system without actually speaking to people who are going to try and get value at the back end.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think that's a great point, especially your last there about going and speaking to the stakeholders is so key, especially for our entry-level or sort of designers who are just entering the space, the packaging space. How are they considering some of these systemic complexities? And actually, Linus, I wanted to relay things back to you. I thought your point of sort of making the most of the design rather than relying on materials was very interesting, and I'd just be curious from sort of a designer's perspective, if someone doesn't necessarily have this materials expertise, where would you suggest sort of starting in order to understand the scope of the problem here?
Well, I mean, from the design perspective, regardless of what kind of packaging design you're working on, I think as I said before, I think you need to exaggerate the purpose of the packaging if it has a new purpose. If it requires a behavioral change, whether that is working with symbols or signage or construction of the packaging that allows for the user to instantly know how to work with the package, because as many of the speakers have said, we don't want, if we design a new package with a set purpose to dissolve in water or to be composted or whatever, if we wanted to end up in that specific channel or system. So I can't give you any direct examples on how to do this, but I just want you to think about this when working on the package design. So that's what I can say for now. Yeah.
Excellent. I think those are great points. And something else we were noticing in this topic was the necessity for sort of understanding product shelf life and how that product could actually be transported and saw through the system. So not only understanding the end of life and how those potentially soluble packagings will be handled, but how also are we going to account for shelf life and consumer interaction. So I think behavior change has been touched upon on some level, but I'm curious if the panel has any thoughts on, especially around shelf life, if like higher acid products need different materials, or light sensitivity, as well as anything around transport and shipping.
Just chipping in some ideas here. I think this disappearing of the package can be triggered by different things. Can be triggered by by water, for example, making it soluble in water, etc. So then, of course, you need to think through throughout the supply chain. How do I make sure, or how do I avoid my package to come in contact with water? Because then it would start dissolving at during somewhere in the supply chain where I don't want it to dissolve yet. Similarly, if the disappearing is triggered in by other means, think through how to avoid that. If it would be triggered by light, for example, then you might want to have it packaged in some kind of non-translucent packaging through the supply chain to avoid that, etc. So I think that could be a way of thinking about it. And not just now that we're talking about this, just one other thing that pops up around using light to trigger degradability. There's a whole debate around oxo-degradable plastics, and these are claimed to biodegrade, triggered by light. There's a lot of scientific studies. None of them has actually really proven that these oxo-degradable plastics really biodegrade. And they rather, according to these scientific studies, they rather notice some kind of fragmentation into microplastics, but those micro pieces do not further biodegrade, or at least not in a reasonable time scale to make them compostable or make them biodegrade in a reasonable time frame. So be careful with those type of materials and the claims around those, because that's still up for the whole scientific debate.
I think we could also touch in on why shelf life and preserving the product is important, and that's maybe obvious, but the environmental impact for product loss in most cases are far greater than the environmental impact for the production of the packaging material. So it's really important to consider and take into to point why the shelf life is an important point. So yeah, that's just the addition.
Excellent. Thanks so much to our panelists. I thought that was really insightful. So let's jump on to our next topic discussion. And so this has sort of emerged from, again, these are directly pulled from themes and patterns that we're seeing on the OpenIDEO platform amongst our IDEA cohort. And so we're seeing a lot of ideas coming around new bottle cap formats, which may seem pretty specific of an application or a format within the greater scope of our use cases. However, we're seeing such an emphasis on this, we thought it sort of justified its own discussion. So keeping a bottle on the cap certainly is the safest way to make sure it's collected for recycling. However, this varies depending on facility and region and capacity of different facilities in your area. Even though the cap and the bottle are not made from the same material, caps can be separated from what's typically a PET bottle in most facilities. So we're seeing some innovative systems to sort of keep these lids attached to the bottles, whether it be through some sort of fun or engaging new behavior emphasis, or just a different way of attaching things. But we wanted to discuss sort of the merits of these ideas and the areas to consider when we're designing within this scope. And so we'll kick it off to Peter, who will be our first respondent.
Yeah, hi. So at Closed Loop Recycling, we designed and built the world's first PET and HDPE food grade facility that enabled us to do true bottle-to-bottle recycling. And evidently, bottle caps were a key part of that. And I think the thing to point out is when we got them back through the facility, although that we could not make them back into food grade plastics for bottles, there still was an onward market for the caps, which we could make into new functional products, predominantly downcycling. So I think the first thing is, from a reprocessing perspective, there is a value to the cap if we can get it back from the market. And obviously the challenge is just that. And I think reading through, I think there's some great and quite exciting ideas. And what I think I wanted to do is just point out, I think, 4 key areas which I think need a focus. The first being that the cap must be functional. It's got to seal the bottle both before and after, and the seal has to work within ambient conditions, and I think that's key. And material choice is key to this, and predominantly the marketplace has seen the mixture of a hard and soft plastic to achieve this seal. For example, within a plastic bottle, a PET bottle and a PP lid. I think there are instances where the same materials have been used for bottle and cap. For example, within the UK, we use HDPE caps and HDPE bottles. But I think what you find is you don't get that efficient seal with that. Certainly within the UK, we have a foil sealer that you take off when you first look to use the bottle. And I think if anyone in the UK has then laid their bottle on the side within a fridge, that cap is not strong and you get leakage of milk. So I think the key thing is that's not to say that you can't use the same plastic for the bottle, but that's going to be the challenge in getting the correct seal. I think secondly, the cap at the moment is the sole mechanism for tamper evidence, and therefore the cap has to have the functionality to show when it has been opened from the first time and not. I think as well, and there's a few ideas around evidently using the cap for branding, which is undoubtedly an opportunity for this. I think it's also worth noting that in certain instances, the colour of the cap is actually an indicator of the product as well. Again, sorry to focus on the UK, but within the milk industry, different colours will detail which type of milk. For example, green is semi-skimmed. So there's going to need to be some work within that if you're going to use that from a branding perspective or a consumer engagement perspective. There's already a certain engagement already built into the colours of lids within the marketplace. And I think certainly from a collection and reprocessing perspective, once bottles are collected and sorted within recycling facilities, the way in which they then reach the reprocessors is through an element of baling. So there's a couple of things here. Firstly, the cap system cannot limit the existing compression of the bottle. Evidently, there's a yield from getting X amount of bottles within a mil-sized bale, and having a cap that would mean that you couldn't get that compression would evidently have quite serious economic impact on the seller of that material to the reprocessor. And secondly, when you're compressing the bottle, if the cap is in a way not firmly fixed to that bottle, there may be a way in which that bottle cap could pop off and therefore find its way onto the floor of the recycling facility and never meet the reprocessor. So in going through that process of baling bottles to very tight compression, it's got to go through that if we want to keep it within the system to get to the reprocessor. So I think there are some fantastic ideas on the lid. I think one thing potentially I could suggest that could work not in isolation but alongside this is some ways of engagement. Whether the cap could be seen in isolation. Could we go to a system, for example, where beverages are served in bottles without caps and people carry around a reusable cap, which they could buy if it's lost, and therefore you push that back to the user. Or perhaps not going that far, we get these caps supported by deposit systems, whereby a deposit is only paid back from a vendor if you've got the bottle and the cap on it as well. So I think whilst there's a lot of product design here, I think that there is also room for some systems and consumer engagement angles as well. So I'll just hand on. That's from me, and hand on to the next panelist.
Yes, thanks, Peter. Very good points, and I'm also happy that you covered the material choices and how that can impact recyclability and cost. Because I will talk a little bit more on the other side of adoption, market adoption, and I do think that this could be a really great win indeed for the whole plastic issue if these types of innovations could reach it into the market and ultimately can be adopted by the full chain from like the producers of bottles to ultimately to the recycling side, where indeed it doesn't pose any issues and actually can add value in the recycling process in the end. So like I was also interested to read about this cap as an innovation which claims to already be able to produce at the same price levels as normal caps. So then you actually wonder what indeed is holding it back in terms of adoption and implementation. And well, it's great from you, Peter, to hear that is partially on the front of recycling. There's one systemic perspective point I want to make first, and that is how can we ensure that like making optimal PET recyclable bottles is not creating lock-ins for making PET bottles even more desirable as a product, because we know that there's still many systems out there, globally speaking, that where the infrastructure is not existing to collect the bottles, and then whether or not the cap is connected to the bottle, that still might result in huge leakage of the bottles in the first place. And I think that there's definitely circumstances, think about tap water systems, or at least the delivery of products like water, which could also see alternative delivery systems as opposed to PET, single-use PET. That's a side note. And that being said, I do think that there's a great potential here. And actually, it sounds very much like also in terms of adoption, that this could be a very key topic to put forward in some kind of global packaging standard or some form of legislation in which it is actually becoming more regulated how and in what way a cap should be connected or should stay connected to a bottle to allow for its recyclability. And that is probably not easy, and I think that's something that EMF is working on very hard. And I think this is part of the market conditions that are necessary for these types of innovations to enter the market. And so how we usually look at market development and this type of innovations to be adopted, this definitely is, policy change is a very key thing. So I would say working closely with parties like EMF to create large-scale awareness amongst policymakers that there's actually a huge win if we manage to create, for example, this global standard in which these bottle cap systems are becoming more standard practice. Also, behavioral change, how to create more awareness amongst the public that this type of system actually can be very beneficial, and how really understanding also from the user's perspective what might be some challenges that they might be facing while using this. For example, think of people that use single-use PET still reusable. Can you actually use this cap-on system multiple times, even though you're not originally designing it for it to be used that way? And then I think, like in terms of knowledge development, it seems like there's a lot of knowledge gaps that are still out there in the market. Understanding the recyclability potential at the level of recyclers, and getting this data to become more visible, and to ultimately, and that's the point of market entry, which is the fourth point, which is very essential to, I think, for this type of innovation to become adopted in the market. How can early adopters be convinced to start to use these innovations, and where can you identify them, and what is holding them back currently to adopt it? Is it indeed the recyclability at the end? I'm not so sure. So those are more, I think, considerations to give us food for thought for the rest of the discussion. So I'm opening up that, giving it back to you, Chris.
Excellent. I think those are all great points. Thank you both so much for sharing. And yeah, let's just, if any other of our panelists have thoughts, feel free to jump in.
Maybe one more thing from my side. I also just shared it in the chat box, but I first of all very much like all the technical requirements that Peter listed for bottles and caps to work through the system. I think one thing I want to add there is that once these bottles with the caps on reach the PET recycler, there he would shred all the material and then do a float sink separation, where PET materials which have a density less than water would sink, and all the PP material from the caps would float, and then so the PET recycler would obviously only be interested in the PET that he would then recycle. But he would most often sell on kind of the floating fraction to a PP recycler, who can then recycle that material of the caps as well. So one other kind of technical requirement for the design is to make sure that either the bottle and the cap have the same material. As Peter already said, there are some kind of sealing challenges there, or that the two materials can be easily separated from each other through sink float sorting, because that's the type of sorting that's currently used in all existing infrastructure.
Excellent. That's a great point, Sander. Thank you. And one question we got just in the last couple of minutes we have, and this is something we had observed on our end as well, is how to account for price shift, right? So there are going to be incremental cost increases, more than likely, when you're creating new formats or even adding a small amount of material to create a new mechanism to attach a cap. And while there's some certainly intangible marketing benefit that may come from some of these, I'm curious if any of our panelists have thoughts around how to mitigate or account for these incremental cost increases, especially from how they work into a broader systems and bottom line perspective.
Yeah, hi, this is Peter here, and certainly in terms of looking at plastic bottles, I think fundamentally there's got to be a bit of a pull from the marketplace. It's got to be demand-led, albeit we can probably develop systems, plastic bottles being one, that we can effectively collect a lot more plastic bottles. Reality is the commercials are driven by creating greater value in that product at end of life. For example, we mentioned the bottle and the cap. If we can increase the take-up of post-consumer material within the manufacturing process at the back end, it becomes more valuable to extract these fractions, even extracting greater material potentially used at the front end to drive value at the back end. When we got investment for our facility in the UK, we did that by going to the dairy industry and by going to one of the leading supermarkets at the time and saying, if you commit to putting post-consumer material into your products, we will have a business model to build the site, and that's exactly what we did. So by doing that and getting those guys to specify that, we created a demand and a value to the material which can offset some of the challenges at the front end. So ultimately, you know, again, it needs to be commercial through the chain, but I'd say that the more you can do to create greater value for the product at end of life when it's recovered, ideally as a valuable raw material, then, you know, the less the considerations downstream in terms of, you know, how to get that material through and collected will be felt. So I would say always look at the demand, always look at what you can do at the back end to increase the value of that material once it's been reprocessed.
Excellent points, Peter. Thank you so much. So hopefully everyone got some insights from that. I for one, certainly learned a fair bit, and I've been pretty close to this for some time now. So thank you all for sharing this excellent points. So we're actually going to move into our Q&A section. So participants, you may know when you signed up, we had the opportunity to submit some questions for our panelists. These may be very directly related to your concepts, but we pulled out a couple that we thought were really compelling. And actually going to hand it over to our community manager, Lauren, who is with me here. You may have seen her on the platform, sort of commenting on some of your ideas and providing some insight, and she's going to lead us through the Q&A section.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. So we did receive amazing questions from our global community, and we would just love to channel those to our panelists. So the first one is from Ariane Orlock, and the question is, what are examples of successful circular business models for designers to keep in mind when innovating in the plastics ecosystem? And I would love to hear Sandrine's thoughts on that.
Yes, thanks for the great question. There's a lot of things to say about that, and I do think that first and foremost, successful business models very much depend on the context and on products specifically. So it's in that sense a little bit challenging to name like a full range, but I just want to highlight a couple of inspiring business models that I've seen also in other domains that I think highlight some key elements for me about what makes business models successful ultimately. And one of those key elements for me is that impacts are phased out virtually on all fronts. So not just on unfronted materials in the sense that material value is preserved, but also that there is zero or even a net positive impact on a lot of other fronts like energy or social or a societal value or biodiversity impact. So while at the same time still delivering great performance and value to users. And so if you think about in the category of, for example, fundamentally rethinking formats of packaging, I very much like Ecovative and their microfoam packaging, which is designed from mycelium or mushroom-based, bio-based material, in which they've really thought well about where they're sourcing their materials from, but also how it should be treated at the end of life, and also how they've set up collaborations with key industry partners to make this packaging form actually fly and work. I also am very inspired by truly out-of-the-box sort of ideas in the packaging sphere, which, you know, like thinking about packaging-free supermarkets and food co-ops, really decentralizing the way how consumer goods are being delivered and how, for example, single-use packaging could be perhaps completely be eliminated, only working with reusable containers, and also looking at how, for example, new trends in drone delivery or RFID identification could actually facilitate this, which is now very much a niche and very difficult to sustain as a business model. But I do really see that this is an inspiring sort of way forward. And then there's a lot of great circular business models, even though they're still very small. But I also very much like the Fairphone as a circular business model, which really thinks more of a product in terms of a service offering functionality, building in modularity from the start, making sure that the resources are recovered at the highest value possible, and that impacts along the chain are also minimized as much as possible, but still trying to create highest usability for user usability at the level of the use of the phone itself. So, I mean, there's lots of other great examples of thinking in the field of, creating circular loops in the biocycle, waste to chemicals or proteins from waste, all those types of products. But for me, the bottom line is really that those business models, circular business models, are successful because they take a full systems perspective in consideration and actually start to create a lot more value than just economic value or just one eliminating one impact or solving one issue. They're really taking it to the next level in that sense. So that would be my initial response to this question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. So moving on, we have another question from our community from Jacqueline. She's wondering, how do we balance the ever-growing need for efficiency and convenience against the needs of the Earth? And I'll hand this over to Sander to answer.
All right. Yeah, I think I think that there's a whole. It very much links to the whole idea behind the circular economy, which is creating a system, a system that works and that kind of works both, within the planetary boundaries, but at the same time also works in terms of delivering the or meeting the needs of our society in terms of convenience and costs and other things. And I think that's. I mean, I'm not a designer myself, but from a discussion I had with a designer in the past, he told me that designing is all about combining the different design criteria or the different boundary conditions that you have, and trying to find a solution that meets all of them as good as possible. And I think convenience and efficiency do not necessarily need to be contradictory to staying within the needs of the Earth. So I think that's exactly why we're having this challenge. I think just to draw upon your creativity and design skills to find these solutions that can actually balance the two. Yeah.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And then our final question comes from Matt Jones, and he's wondering, what is holding businesses back from switching to biodegradable plastics? Peter would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, very good question. I think we've touched on this throughout the call. I think from my perspective, I have an element of confusion, and I'm sure therefore that the consumer or the business does, is what do we actually mean by biodegradable plastics? I think there is a real exchange of terminology here between biodegradable and compostable that means there's a lot of confusion in the marketplace. So I think one thing is to really understand what the differences are and what the solutions are for either. I think then in terms of looking at biodegradability, I think we then need to look at what are the actual net impacts if we're looking at disposing things potentially within a fairly open environment. What does that have in terms of quite a contravening message that people ultimately we don't want people to dispose of things in the environment. We want them to put them back through a system, and then I think finally do those systems based solutions whereby we are recovering material back and getting some value. Are they currently perceived as having a greater financial or commercial benefit, because obviously we can recover material, and then faced with resource scarcity, that then provides a raw material for new manufacturers. So I think my initially things with what holding it back is what do we mean when we talk about biodegradable packaging? And I think the first thing will be to be very clear in terms of that, so people can understand what the offer is on the table.
If I can, I just want to add a quick point. I think we don't have enough business models that show that there are actual business savings for doing that switch. So primary incentive for businesses often is saving money. So there are some examples that are growing through a program called Rethink Disposables that's run by Clean Water Action. That might be an interesting resource for people to look at.
Excellent. Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, I was thinking of you because you made some great points in sort of priority of compostability versus biodegradability and recycling. So to all of our participants, we'll sort of share back notes and bullet points and actually share this recording as well for those of you who want to go back and listen to some of the more specific points that came up. Cool. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you first to all of our panelists. We really appreciate, one, the work you're doing. It's really important work in the world, and so we're really thankful for that, as well as just sharing your insights and expertise. As we noted in this quick hour, it's a pretty complex system, and there's certainly a lot of moving parts to keep in mind. So even having some of these insights is just so helpful as we're encouraging others to sort of join the space and start designing around these problem areas. So I want to make some quick points. Many of our panelists here, as well as some others, have agreed to do one-on-one sessions during the refinement phase. So for those of you who have submitted ideas and move on to the next phase of the challenge, that'll be happening sort of next week. You'll have the opportunity to meet one-on-one and actually get some really in-depth insights with some of our expert panelists. So that's really an excellent option that they're offering. All of those of you who are listening and thinking about submitting an idea, if you have not already, the ideas phase closes on the 28th. That's this Friday at 11:30 p.m. Pacific time. So that's the last opportunity. We'll be accepting submissions. We won't be accepting late submissions for this challenge. So please mark your calendars and get ready to join the challenge. So we're excited to have you. Thank you so much for everyone joining us. We'll actually make a copy of the chat and some of the questions that you all are submitting in the chat. We'll do our best also to send you some answers to those. Again, we'll share out these recordings, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.